Great. Thank you, Rachel. It's an honor to be here today. I'm filling in for John Winkler, our general manager. He is getting ready for some testimony on a hearing tomorrow, so if you feel like saying something in support, you're welcome to attend tomorrow. Thank you for the introduction. I have worked at the Papio-NRD now for 2 tours. Once out of college, I started there for about 6-7 years. I went to work for Olson and then came back about 4 years ago to the NRD in a role I wasn't as familiar with, and that was the groundwater side of things. So I'll go through some background of how that works with our natural resource district, and then focus on how some of these things are challenges and priorities. Most of you are familiar with the map there that shows the different natural resource districts across the state. Of course, the Papio-Missouri River NRD is the far eastern, on the eastern end, northeastern part of the state. We're the only district to ever been merged. We started out as 2 different districts, what was kind of a southern part and a northern part. And after time went on and financially things weren't working as well, those 2 districts were merged. So I guess we could be called the Platte River, Elkhorn River, Missouri River, Papillion Creek NRD, but that seemed a little long. Anyway, we still have a merged name, as you can see from the name. We do lie at the bottom of very large watersheds across Nebraska and including the Missouri River as well. Almost approximately 40% of Nebraska's population is in our district. Obviously, most of that being the Omaha metro area. We're going to talk about that today in terms of its water need, but also some issues that presents in terms of where people are getting their drinking water source. It's a little bit more varied than you might think, and how our geology plays a part in that. We do have 5 different office locations. We have 11 directors and about 50 staff. And between actually what we get from grants and what we get from and some other funding that was paid for through bonds, our property tax is about 34% of our budget, or makes up about 34% of our budget. So that's kind of an estimate based on the latest year. You've probably also, most of you, seen this before, which is the responsibilities of natural resource districts. Being as varied as we are, our NRD is involved in some sort, one way or another, in all 12 of these different responsibilities. The ones I'm going to talk mostly about today is water supply for beneficial uses, conservation and protection of groundwater and surface water sources, and pollution control. At the Papio, we've kind of broken that down into these general areas, and most of the time when we talk about what our priorities would be, or what is the priority of our different challenges, you would mostly hear about the flood control, the flood risk issues in our NRD, how those play a major part in things we do, from flood control around the Omaha area to levees and dams, even along the Missouri River over there and around Offutt Air Force Base. So those certainly are a major priority for our district. And what I'm here to talk about today is kind of the lesser known priority of our district, or one of the other priorities of our district, is how we are working to maintain water quality and quantity. And this was actually something that I think of it as lesser known, because I actually spent 7 years at this natural resource district and didn't pay any attention to it. My job at that time was the flood control side of things, and that's primarily what I did. And then it was amazing when I started this job about 4 years ago. I was like, I'm amazed at what I didn't know in terms of our varying geology, where people are getting their drinking water, those sorts of things. So I hope you're kind of amazed like I was today. This is just some more national background about, the awareness of drinking water source and its quality. I am going to talk quite a bit today about the differences between what we have as far as public water supplies and then what we also have as far as individual domestic drinking water supplies, individual wells in our NRD. And the differences there is where they're actually getting their water geology-wise. So you have risks both from the groundwater itself or from the water source of the river. And you also have risks that can occur throughout the treatment and distribution system. So our NRD isn't involved in that part of it, but again, we're trying to work together and promote awareness of the whole thing. This graph is a national graph showing the population of municipal and self-supplied domestic water. So in basic terms, as our national population has went up, most of those people have been continuing to get their water from public drinking water supplies, which is good. Those we test and we make sure that it's very high quality water in all those drinking water supplies. So it also probably shows some urban versus rural trends in that, as the domestic supply would represent more individual private wells in different areas. So how does that national trend kind of compare when you look at the population of just the Omaha area? In this case, it's a combination of Douglas and Sarpy County. We certainly have that continued rising trend. I sometimes get the question, is this, you see all the suburbs being built around Omaha, are people just moving from the inner city out sometimes? And no, our population's really growing by that much. I mean, people are really coming into the city, and yeah, I mean, people might be moving around within the city, but that still doesn't mean there's not more people there each and every day. So this dates back quite a ways, you can see there, but certainly an increasing trend in both Douglas and Sarpy County. So where do all these people, well, this map also shows those trends. So what was in pink was what was developed as of around 1970. So you can see the amount of areas that's been added to the Omaha area since then, and continues to grow. There was a short period, 2008 to 2010 or 11, where things slowed down, but it's back on the increase again. There are multiple urban areas. We'll talk a little bit more about, so there actually is more than just MUD that supplies the area, although they're the major supplier of public water. This map looks at all the different, on this side over here, all the different wellhead protection areas. So this is where we have groundwater wells that are getting public water supplies. In general, this map over here shows MUD's area, but it also shows the coverage areas of rural water systems in our district, which are pretty important. Our NRD actually owns and operates 3 different rural water systems, and then the big red one you see is all part of Logan East from the Lower Elkhorn Natural Resource District. Most of the people choose to be on rural water in that area because of not necessarily bad water quality in terms of health problems, but certainly aesthetic and smell problems and things like that. So, but it is amazing, even though I'll talk mainly about our major water sources of the Missouri River Valley Aquifer and the Platte Elkhorn River Valley Aquifer. Most of our communities, other than MUD, Lincoln, Papillion, and, well, Dakota City and South Sioux City would get theirs from the Missouri River Valley. Most of those communities that you think of along the Missouri River Valley, Blair gets theirs from the river, but going up from there, they choose to get theirs out of the Dakota sandstone aquifers, just as a form of better protected groundwater, and what most of the time is a better quality source as well, even though it can have some of those aesthetic issues with smell and taste. So I have a couple more graphs here to give you an indication as to how many people then are actually served by public water supply, and it looks really good. Over 97% are served by a public water supply system. The issue is 3% is still over 20,000 people who get their water from individual domestic wells. And it takes many hundreds or many times the amount of wells to supply those 20,000 people than it does to supply the nearly 770,000 other people. So that's just kind of the breakdown. We went back through this during our groundwater management plan update, and I thought it was kind of interesting to see those facts. Get that off there. So here are the numbers actually put down by county. I kind of looked at the census data and then also what the building records were in the census data to get an idea of how many, because we've only been registering domestic wells since 1993. So given how many domestic wells there were and how many houses were built since that time, about how many more domestic wells could we expect to have occurred. But that gave us a good idea. It was kind of a way of cross-referencing both the total population of the county and how many people we think are actually being served by individual domestic wells. So just in general, you look at those numbers, we are serving about 10,000 people with rural water supply, 750,000 people with municipal water supply, but again, over 20,000 people. Most of those, as you can see by the chart here, in Washington, Douglas, and Sarpy County. And that'll be easy to see when you see the map of the wells. But first, before we talk too much more about where the domestic wells are and where they're getting some of their water and maybe some of the issues they might run into in the future, I did want to talk a little bit about the water supply and what we're doing there to make sure there is a reliable water supply, both in wet times and in dry times. Looking at this, it's just an indication of how people are actually being able to, one is our water systems continuing to improve, less leaking, less things like that, the investments we're putting into those, but also in people's homes, basically being more aware, reducing their overall consumption. So that is occurring. Even if you look at the USGS 2010 to 2015 census of water use, some of that is variable in the amount of water we did get, so maybe people just didn't water their lawns because we got decent rains at times, but it is indicating more of a trend of overall declining use per household. So that's good. As far as, but again, how much is that offsetting the increased amount of people you saw coming into the area in those other graphs? I think it certainly is holding its own. If you can tell from, I don't have any statistics from like MUD that show, or Lincoln that show exactly their total amount pumped and used each year, but it's kind of holding steady, if not going down a little bit. So in particular, where does Omaha's water, MUD's water come from? And we'll talk a little bit more about the other municipalities as well. But MUD basically has three sources, that being the oldest source and largest source is from the Missouri River north of Omaha. But then approximately any given year, about 50% comes from two well fields along the Platte, out here on the west and down here on the south side of the city. And then Lincoln's water supply is here, as most of you know, near I-80. But all of that water, of course, relies upon water originating in the upper parts of the basin and actually making its way down there to serve those groundwater aquifers or to continue to be surface water supplies. Again, this map is just giving a general indication of the different wellhead protection areas that we have. So we do have the city of Papillion also has a well field down there along the southern part, what would be west of MUD. So they draw off the Platte River bottom. But even probably Gretna is one of the main last remaining communities in the upland area that has their own water supply. They actually have wells that go through kind of an upland sand, glacial sand outwash area, but also go down to the Dakota sandstone as well. So they have wells screened in two different aquifers or two different areas. But how long will they will probably continue to be a major water supplier. Springfield continues to have its own water supply. The city of Valley does. But everybody else is pretty much hooked on to MUD, that being Bellevue, La Vista, Elkhorn, Ralston, Bennington, Waterloo even is connected through MUD. So, from a broader question, is water supply meeting our water need? This is, of course, a question asked many times in many different places across Nebraska. It was asked when this map was originally put together, and we, at one time, the Lower Platte Basin was declared fully appropriated. Since that time, it is declared not fully appropriated, but we have been living with some limitations on growth. And that was something that also spurred us to do a whole basin-wide plan, which I'm generally going to talk about here, as to how we decided whether we had an adequate water supply or not. So the Lower Platte Basin Plan has probably been developed over the last 3 to 4 years. It was actually adopted last year. It looked at being consistent at how all the NRDs and areas within the basin look at their water supply and use. So one of the goals that came out of that, or one of the objectives, was everybody would be using the same system to be tracking their water uses. It also was a basis of looking at what is the potential excess. So we've got this little bit of conundrum in the fact that excess water, if you consider it excess, above and beyond what's required for in-stream flows, things like that, does pass past the Platte River and out to the Missouri. So in some instances, on most average years or better than average years, we're letting water pass by that could be used. On the other side is during drought years, we certainly wouldn't even have enough today to say that we have a huge supply. We have problems that happen with the city of Lincoln's water supply, things like that, when we go into droughts. So we wanted to be, I think the basin plan is aware of those. It still finds a way that there is a responsible way of continuing to develop and seeing what kind of happens over time. So that this is the large look at that accounting I was discussing. We did go to a more conservative estimate, which in-stream flows, this is what needs to pass the Platte River down by Louisville, would have been more like 20% of the average annual stream flow over a 20-year period. It's the same period that was being used in the basin evaluation by DNR. So through that same period, but we upped that to about 40% to be more conservative and to provide a stronger base of stream flow in the Platte River. So on average, we did show that there were excess supplies that would allow development to continue to occur in the Loop, in the Elkhorn, and in the Lower Platte Basin itself. So pulling all those numbers together, we decided to use it reasonably, we would divide it up. In this case, it's over an entire 50-year period, if this excess is ever completely used at all. But that on each 5 years increments, each NRD would be allocated a certain amount, and we would basically take a new look every 5 years at what has that really done. Because one of the things on the other side of the coin, statistically at stream gauges, we haven't actually seen this reduction occur because of additional use in the eastern part of Nebraska. Stream flow, if you do some statistical analysis on them, actually had for some reason, a little jump in the early 80s and has continued to show that increase since that time. So, you know, we're going to continue to monitor the situation, see if we really are having an effect as time goes on. It was kind of amazing as we got to the end of this, all the different NRDs were able to get together in their own little groups and decide, iron out, if you will, politically, who should get what water. So this is how those basins break down. So this is what we're tracking against every year. If we get a new, I guess what is new development? If we get a new well to be put in, even if we got a new like sandpit lake, we'd have to look at potential offsets for their loss. So those are depletions on the system. Right now, continued municipal growth is somewhat a little bit covered in the fact that both MUD and Lincoln would have permissible uses up to their permit limits now, which they're not even really close to using yet. So there is some continued growth. I guess that's in MUD's case. Lincoln is a little closer. But there is continued growth allowed without going through and saying, well, Omaha added another 1,000 people. What additional water use is that? So we don't have to do that at the current time. But that is something we need to address for some of the smaller communities as time goes on here. So this idea that okay, we've just talked about having plenty of water. Why do we need to have a discussion on water quantity and reliability? It is all related to drought. Those years that we would have much lower than normal stream flows do have an impact on the lower Platte River system, both as a river itself and as a supply to our different needs. This was taken from the drought mitigation plan we've been working on together with Lower Platte South, Lower Platte North, MUD, DNR, and Lincoln Water Systems together. So that plan has kind of come together here. This was just a graphic trying to give you a idea of the fingers that go out and what are the impacts from drought. And they kind of stem from hitting the agricultural area to also our municipal needs, and then they just grow from there. I mean, everybody's going to kind of be impacted by a potential drought situation. And that economic impact it's not like a flood where it came and went. We're going to have to put a whole bunch into rebuilding, but then we'll be okay again for a while. To some extent, it's a longer-term issue, a longer-term impact. So the drought mitigation plan we're working on right now does look at some actions to take, potentially to offset what we don't have in the river or what we don't have in the system when we have a drought. But right now, it's all very preliminary, and I'll show you those too. But what the drought plan does, it's going through its final adoption process now. There was some public meetings on it in December and leading up here we'll submit it to the Bureau of Reclamation, and they'll give their review. But when we finally adopt it, all it will really do is say, here's a planning mechanism, a way to monitor for droughts that you guys can all work on together. Lincoln does this a little bit already on their own because the major impact is when water flow gets too low in the Platte. They have to take some extreme measures. They've done quite a bit to mitigate this with new wells and changes to their well field itself, and with some additional wells. But you still have this, as the river gets drier, you have less and less efficiency that you can pump. So one of the ideas was, and this is actually an occurrence that did happen in 2012, but if basically it stopped raining for the year and the drought started, how would the river react over time? And what this does is give you some idea of ahead of that drought when you be looking at potentially taking actions or doing this. This was all done with work through HDR and Flatwater Group as well. But right now, it's just asking this group of NRDs and communities to get together and look at what actions might be necessary. As far as the different drought actions, these are still pretty highly variable and up in the air. There are some that are more controversial than others, which would be potentially like new reservoirs versus using some existing systems. Also potential to bring in water from the Missouri River. So if you were like north of Blair, could you bring it across the divide into the Elkhorn River drainage? Those are all options. I think there is some potential to keep looking at augmentating groundwater to the river during a drought. Because there is if you think of the large expanse, and I'll get into that a little bit geology-wise, the large expanse of area between the Platte and the Elkhorn River is a massive groundwater storage area. Maybe there's ways to potentially work on utilizing that to help offset drought. So those are all just kind of pie in the sky ideas right now. As this plan moves forward, it would allow these options to be looked at in further detail and see if there are actually potential measures that could be done. But I think as a result of both these things, the basin plan and the drought mitigation plan, is that we know we want to do the best we can to develop the water resources we have responsibly throughout the basin, knowing on most years, 19 out of 20 years, we're good. The problem is that 20th year comes along and we have a big drought. We know there's also actions that need to be taken so that those things that we did, those developments that we did, don't cause a further impact on the system. So that's kind of what these different options are aimed at. So I told you I'd get back to private domestic wells and their water source. The map is kind of the most startling thing on the slide. It shows the concentration of domestic wells around the Omaha area. You wouldn't, and this has actually been controlled to some extent by them monitoring how close is somebody to a new water main. Do they actually really have to put in their own individual well? That occurs in Douglas County right now, and we should probably work on systems in Sarpy and Washington County to do that as well. I think Lancaster does that to kind of control the amount of domestic wells that get put in as well. But certainly a large amount of acreage lands or even older farmsteads out there that have domestic wells in the area. How do we know that they're able to get enough water and recharge? And that's what we're going to kind of go through. I'll go through a little bit of our geology background so you have a taste for that, and then we'll answer a little bit more. But most of these wells, as we'll look at this, are in the Dakota Sandstone, Dakota Formation system, because there isn't really a big aquifer directly underneath the Omaha area. You've seen probably this before, the overlapping and the discussion about the aquifers. So certainly in the east, we don't have the major Ogallala Formation that underlies all of the area. We have both alluvial aquifers that are very important and have tremendous water supplies, but we also have some bedrock formations beneath that are important water sources, especially for the domestic wells I just mentioned. So why is it different? This area, the Ogallala Formation, was eroded, so it left these other bedrock areas. They can be discontinuous and disconnected, so they're not all part of the same system. As you get to look underneath the Luss Hills and the glacial bluffs there, they're more prone potentially to overuse, or if they did get contaminated, they're a smaller source, so they're not always being recharged or diluted. The good thing is, to some extent, they're within or below glacial deposits, so they can be protected at times. I think in this sense, we've also found in certain cases where actually our interference, to some extent, our development of wells has led to the ability for them to get contaminated. And we're talking about both alluvial and bedrock aquifers. So this is a general diagram of what that lower part looks like with the Platte Elkhorn River alluvium valley was cut out, either cut out the Dakota Formation or cut out underlying older Pennsylvanian limestone type formations. And you'll see a transition of this as you kind of go from Douglas to Sarpy County. There are Paleo Valley channels, so old outwashes, actually in some places you wouldn't think about. So basically north of Gretna along I-80 is a big cutout. The whole Dakota Formation was eroded out, and there's old sands and gravel systems left back in there. And that's then you do have the Dakota system, which we'll talk about, can either have the shale, silts, and clays, very non-aquifer material, or it can certainly have the sandstones, which might have even been broke down over time and act more like sands, typical sands in aquifer today. And those will be good sources of aquifer material. So this map gives a broad overview of the whole system. So we have the two major alluvial river valleys, the Platte and the Elkhorn combined, and then when the two come together, just the Platte River Valley from there. And then the Missouri River Valley on the east. There are portions of our district that don't have the Dakota Formation that underlie it, but they're pretty small, and they are part of the Omaha kind of urban area already. So most of the other areas, like where people are putting in domestic wells, have the Dakota system out there and available. So we can call that a secondary aquifer group. Just looking at the overall sands and gravels, you can see the major thicknesses and occurrences of those along the major river valleys. There also you can see some of the paleo valleys that we have in the district, both up here from Arlington, kind of over in southern Washington County, and then around the Gretna area, like I mentioned, kind of north of I-80 there. This is kind of showing the same thing, but basically looking at that in 3D, where that Dakota Formation sits underlying other deposits. I thought these were two good graphics to show, to give a little bit better definition to the Dakota Formation and how it left some of these, both sandstones and silts and clays in different places. It was part of a coastal plain estuary system at the time, so that's a good reason why it left some sand in places and it left some silts and clays in others, and it's not necessarily homogeneous. And then on top of that, it was worn away in places by glaciation or by the rivers that we have today. So it's really kind of a mixed bag of what we have in our district in terms of availability. But for the most part, people can drill down and find some layer or inclusion in that Dakota aquifer that offers at least enough water to supply a domestic well. So it's not often that people drill and find nothing. It's more often that they drill and find a supply that's going to work. This is the difference that you see in how the kind of Platte River Valley has eroded the different areas. This is just basically on the Douglas-Sarpy County line, and that is all Dakota sandstone from about 35 feet from top to bottom. It's an outcropping right on the edge of the Elkhorn River. And then you get down here to Schramm Park along the south bend of the Platte, and Dakota just sits here at the very top. All the rest of this is different limestone and shales. So how do we understand what's beneath the ground in our area? To some extent, we do have the geologic test hole drilling that was done throughout our area, and we've actually been expanding on that. So I kind of wanted to show this area where what I kind of found is that not all these lines tie together, or maybe there could be a few more holes that pull everything together. Especially, basically, there's no test hole that was actually done in the bottom of the Missouri River Valley. So we went through and added a system of lines there. We've done 2 years of this drilling so far and have made it up to Macy, so from Blair to Macy. This is kind of interesting. We did this in loop, since we didn't have any information there. We didn't want to just go fly AEM data in this area and say, well, now we have nothing to compare it to. At least now, if we ever did that in the future, we would have test hole data to look at. So I think there's still a lot of unknowns about our geology we're trying to wrap our head around. Most of you are probably familiar with what rotary mud drilling. This was, again, an enlightening thing for me when I started 4 years ago, as to how people made sense of all this stuff coming out of a hole when they're drilling it. I'm glad they were more familiar with it than I am. I thought this was, in this one you can really see for about 100 feet, this is out in Valley, for about 100 feet we had the Platte River alluvial sands and gravels. And then it was another 70 feet we drilled, and we just went through mudstone and silt and basically clay in the Dakota Formation. And we finally got to this bit of sand. Well, it's sandstone, but it comes back up and shown as sand for about 30 feet or so. So that was probably but it was plumb full of water down there in that sandstone formation. So was an interesting part. So the lower monitoring well we actually put down in this area is an artesian well, right at the Valley City Ballpark. A flowing artesian well at the Valley City Ballpark. So talk a little bit more about our AEM and what we have been doing. If most of you are familiar with this, it's a kind of a rapid survey system, but a way you can see very deep into the earth for the most part. And as we've refined that, we figured out at what depth we really need to be, what we really want to find. So I won't spend too much more time on that. This is the flights that we had done up through 2018. So our district had worked on following some of those CSD lines. That was kind of gave a good framework for the geology, but also provided a very good test as to how well it could pick up the different areas, because we had a lot of test hole information in that area. Then we went out and did some other areas. We did the southern, basically southwestern Sarpy County area, so we could pick up what was going on with that Dakota Aquifer in that area. That's been very helpful as we continue to use that. We added these other lines in 2018. These have been flown, but we haven't got the report back. So we did try to learn a little bit more about that Paleo Valley in southern Washington County. Also better tie-ins in the Platte River Valley. And then picked up a few cross-sections which we'll be able to kind of tie into those new test holes I was showing you earlier. A little bit more about the objectives of the Sarpy County AEM. This gives you a good idea of what this information is capable of, I think. We wanted to see where those sandstone areas were more connected. That way, if we had a water quality issue, we would know, well, hey, maybe this area next to it's going to have a water quality issue in the future. Or these are connected and could possibly become an issue. And maybe we could help prevent issues from occurring with different domestic wells. So those were some of the questions we wanted to look at. The capability of this new mapping was really neat. It was able to not only pick up the coarse sands and gravels. This is actually a line kind of going from the Platte River up in the hill into Gretna, if you're thinking about straight west to east. You're able to see not only the Platte River, Elkhorn, Platte River Valley sands and gravels here. You're able to see how that connected to what I was mentioning was that larger glacial outwash sands and gravels that go up into the area by Gretna. But even in the Dakota Formation, it was able to kind of split apart what was probably more sandstone, more likely to be sandstone, and what was more likely that clay and silt and shale. So the definition of that has been helpful in that we've been able to find areas where, maybe we do have better sandstone formations, or they are connected. So I've got a few more slides on that just to look at. These are some broader areas that you're looking up the I-80 corridor to the, looking to the east. This does show, I don't know exactly how this occurred, but basically, yeah, the entire Dakota system was eroded right through the middle of it. And so it occurs on both the south and the north side. That's kind of what that's showing. But this is also the light green in this case is more sandstone areas, and the dark green is more likely the more shale and silt areas. So we do have fairly larger sandstone systems. But the other thing we kind of found is that they do kind of occur in lobes or have been bisected by current creeks and streams today. So we kind of have this area around Springfield, and this is an area we're really looking at because this is where the city of Springfield gets its drinking water from. And also there's several domestic wells in this area. We also have an area kind of between Springfield, Turtle, and Buffalo Creek. It's kind of its own lobe, and then the lobe to the south. And we have a pretty good definition here too that all of this Dakota sandstone is tied together with the Platte River Valley sands and gravels. In most cases, it's likely, feeding groundwater, if not into the streams, into the sands and gravels that make up, that then tie into the Platte River Valley as well. So they're not necessarily separated. The AEM was also able to pick up, if you look at just near the surface, what is that data telling you? It can tell you quite a bit about recharge. So we found out, even though this is not part of the Dakota Formation area, but it's just the loess and the silts that sit on top of that, there are a lot more sandier losses as you get to the southern part of that Springfield area. And as you get to the north, closer to the Papillion Creek area, there's a lot more silt and clay material, so both less recharge occurring then in that area, but also better protected from pollution or contaminant issues. So we're not just getting this data and sitting on it, we're going to continue to try to work on it. We're working with USGS to build a 3D model. A lot of this data is already in kind of a 3D model. What we're trying to do is add to that, take areas where we've done known water quality monitoring with them, with USGS since 1992, have them add that in there. Not only will it show us areas we need to do more monitoring to kind of fill in the picture, but it'll also provide some indication as to why certain wells might have particular issues and why some wells may not. Or is it just a matter of time before some other wells have potential water quality issues? So that leads into our water quality discussion. The area that we have, these are all the areas we have sampled over that period of years. Most of the time you're seeing, we're at or below 5 parts per million, but we certainly have some areas of concern that have arisen over time. The sub-area south of Springfield to the Platte River, we found and we did a more detailed testing in that area, usually had some pretty high contaminants in the actually lower parts of the Platte River sands and gravels. The Takema wellhead protection area has always had, well not always, at least as long as we've tested it, had nitrate issues. We specifically have a set of monitoring wells where it's always high in the shallow part there by Takema, but then they have wells both in the bluff that go into the Dakota and in the bottomland in the Missouri River Valley. They get water from both sources, and they're continuing to have nitrate issues continuing to creep up on them in as far as the city's supply. So we're working with them. And then just the area that does encompass the Springfield's wellhead protection area. It isn't above the 5 parts per million yet, but it's part of an area of a concern. How do we move forward on more drinking water monitoring and protection? Obviously, continuing to be involved in wellhead protection is a way to do that. unfortunately, I kind of looked at this and I thought, wow, we're going to have a lot of proactive communities, right, that have already done something in this regard. And now we have 3, and the big ones are ones that have already done it. Most of it's the small communities that haven't moved forward on any types of protection plans. So in terms of those areas concerned, we've worked to offer some cost share to get them going on doing those drinking water protection plans. We've also installed monitoring wells in areas where we could, not only in areas of interest, but in those well protection areas, so that we're doing testing ahead of the community seeing it in their well at some point in time. So that's been an important step in that part. So I kind of mentioned those. What are some of the things the NRD can do to help? Of course, we can use this geologic data we're working on, provide our water quality data as background, all that stuff. But really what the communities need is some additional funding to help them get this done. So we're going to continue to do that if we can. Those are the different actions in well protection areas. Kind of try to pull through the rest of this. The 2 areas, so we are doing 2 new drinking water protection plans, one in Tacoma and one in Springfield. I won't go too much in the background of those. We did get some preliminary AEM data up in the Tacoma area, which was interesting. It kind of shows this, just like in the Platte Valley, there was a certain area that was eroded by the Missouri River that left sands and gravels, but we're finding that it still is connected to this is Dakota sandstone then beneath the hills. So that sandstone is directly in connection with the Missouri Valley aquifer. We also were grateful to get an NET grant just this year to abandon some old wells. They'd been previously abandoned in the late 50s, but they surround one of the community's current used wells at the fire station. So the idea is to re-abandon all of those, even cut the casing and put in a well seal on the outside of the casing at a known aquitard location. So that's going to happen in the next couple years. In terms of water quality for domestic wells, so obviously I see we have all these wellhead protection areas and we work to do that. That's great. We also have, there's not a wellhead protection area delineated or set out for everybody's domestic wells. And why, yes, it is each of their responsibilities to get the tests for their water to make sure what they're drinking is okay. I think there's a larger part to play in looking at the aquifer as a whole and working towards that. So, I kind of see, since the district is a overarching entity that works on groundwater quality, we need to kind of be doing more to raise public awareness about it, for one thing, but also continue to do what we're doing in terms of more geologic data, things like that, that's going to improve our understanding as a whole, especially in the areas where we seem to have some of a lack of understanding. So that's in that areas. Again, I just want to emphasize that we want to be proactive because we have a lot of people that rely on this water and need the protection. My final plea is a help wanted a little bit. We've got, I'm not sure in the Omaha area, I know there's lots of people that work on these different things. I just don't think we all know what each other's doing, for one thing. And the second thing is maybe we're not all clear on what our programs are actually trying to get accomplished in terms of not only protecting community water, but protecting domestic well water as well. So with that, I've wrapped it up. I've got part to questions. So we go ahead and take those, Rachel.
Question? Okay.
In your NRD, how many Nebraskans annually are either sickened or die because of water quality for domestic wells that are unregulated?
I don't think I really know of any that have. Now, whether they've pinned everything back to that as a potential cause, but I don't think we have an alarming actual risk of water quality. We certainly have, like other parts of the state, potential nitrate issues that could creep up on us. But yeah, as far as I know, none that I know of.
Paul, is the district trying to provide incentive for domestic wells to go on to a rural water or public water system?
We only have the ability to do that in smaller areas, so there's still this widespread area of putting in more domestic wells in some cases. There is a goal, at least in Douglas County. Every permit is reviewed, at least within the city's jurisdiction, which is 3 miles outside of the city, is reviewed and approved, and MUD at that time can comment, hey, you're within, I don't even think we have a set distance, but you're within 400 feet of a water main. Okay, you think you can afford to put that, or could MUD afford to put that in and fix it up, potentially? Okay, you're half a mile or a mile away from a water line. Now it's no longer economically feasible, so they get the green light to put in the individual well.
Is that you?
Early in the program, you indicated that the longer-term flow down at Louisville was 20% and that the plan calls to increase that to 40%. Was there a pretty strict accounting for that because of the various facets of drought mitigation, or is that just kind of a ballpark that you're working with?
It was a kind of a ballpark goal, but then all those actual numbers that you see that what I talked about would be our limits. Those are accounting for not taking anything below that 40%. And it helps obviously with the amount of times that you're going to continue to meet the in-stream flow requirement. So, yeah.
Will you take 2 questions from me?
Sure.
Do you share all that great water quality data that you get with the agrochemical groundwater database here at?
Yeah, we do. Since we work with USGS, they handle all that and get it processed, and it's not only available on their national website, but they share it with the university too, and DEQ. Yeah.
Okay, and then my second question, did I understand you correctly to say that domestic wells are permitted by the state or only registered with the state and they don't have to be permitted?
Yeah, they don't have to be permitted, but they have been registered with the state since, I think, a requirement starting early in 1993 or so. So that's, when you see that map that I showed with all the domestic wells, that's just what has been registered since 1993. There's probably 3 times that many sitting out there.
Okay. Very good. Last one.
I assume the recharge for the Dakota sandstone aquifer is precipitation and surface water coming into the system. And thinking about this from the standpoint of sensitivity to drought, what's the rate of turnover in that aquifer? How much capacity do we have when we start seeing recharge slowing down?
Yep. I don't think, from what we know today, we're able to really answer that to any extent. I know the only thing geologically we can kind of show with what we've learned is that the southern area, so south of Omaha in that Sarpy County area, it's only going to be about 50 to 70 feet through the silt and till to get down to the Dakota, and that's all there is right beneath it. If you just go north of Omaha, now you're talking about having to drill wells that are 300 plus feet deep, and there might be 150, 200 feet of till and silt sitting on top of that. So to some extent, I think there's a lot more recharge, a lot more potential, also contaminated issues occurring in Sarpy County necessarily than there is north of Omaha.
Very good. That's what kind of I was curious about too. So great question. Thank you. So very good. Let's thank Paul again for his
Thank you.